We're really excited to have such a diverse audience today. I've seen folks ranging from county administrators to town planners, town managers, and other community volunteers across the state, so welcome. I'd first like to acknowledge that we are based in and doing work in communities situated on the unceded territory of the Wabanaki Confederacy. So again, thanks for joining us for this online learning series hosted by the Community Resilience Partnerships Regional Coordinators and Community Partners. The series entitled Building Stronger Communities is designed for communities already enrolled in the Community Resilience Partnership, the CRP, those currently enrolling, or those looking to enroll. So we've put a link in the chat about the program's website, and I'll share more about the Community Resilience Partnership here in a moment. But first, let me introduce myself and my fellow presenters. So my name's Yvette Meunier, and I'm the Region 3 Coordinator for the CRP. I work with service providers and communities in the Androscoggin, Franklin, Kennebec, Oxford, and Somerset counties. And I'm also joined by 3 service providers today in Region 3, and they include Robin Stanicki, the Community Resilience Coordinator with Kennebec Valley Council of Governments, where she works with municipalities to explore new resources and help communities thrive. She has a degree in sociology and social work and a master's in human development and higher education from the University of Maine. Claire McGlinchey is a climate resiliency program manager with a Center for an Ecology-Based Economy in Norway, where she helps Maine communities take advantage of public funding opportunities for decarbonization and energy efficiency improvement projects. She comes to CB with an undergraduate degree in environmental science and communications from Temple University, and she's pursuing her master's degree in natural resources from UNH. And then lastly, we've got Zach Goslin. He's the environmental and resiliency planner for the Androscoggin Valley Council of Governments, where he runs AVCOG Solid Waste Technical Assistance Program and is also a service provider in the Community Resilience Partnership. He holds a bachelor's degree in environmental science from Huston University. And just as a reminder, the event is going to be recorded for later viewing, and we're also going to share all the resources, slides, contacts, and everything else that we talk about in the event with you afterwards. Just a quick overview of today's agenda. We'll start out with an overview of the Community Resilience Partnership, followed by an update from Kennebec Valley Council of Governments on Somerset and Kennebec County updates, followed by CB with Oxford County updates, and with Zach at AVCOG's updates for Franklin County, followed by the Q&A. Next slide. So just before we dive into this, I want to let you know that we are going to put a handout, the CRP fact sheet that's been sent in advance of the meeting in the chat. That's a one-page fact sheet that is going to cover most of what I'm going to talk about today. So the Community Resilience Partnership Program is a new program from the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, also known as GOPIF, which started in the beginning of 2022 and is funded by a $4.75 million allocation in the state's biennial budget. The program is aligned with the Maine Won't Wait 4-year climate action plan and helps Maine communities reduce emissions and prepare for the impacts of climate change. The partnership provides both grant funding and direct support to municipal and tribal governments for climate mitigation and adaptation projects. And it affords 2 different types of funding sources. One are grants to service providers to help communities get started. And then there are direct community grants for planning and implementing climate action aligned strategies along the lines of the Maine Climate Action Plan. Next slide. So each spring and fall, service provider organizations like CB, AVCOG, and KVCOG on the line today apply for grants to assist between 2 and 5 communities to get started with these requirements. One is adopting a resolution of commitment, and towns must make a pledge of commitment to join the partnership. Second, they need to complete a pair of assessments, and these require you to review plans, policies, and procedures that you have on the books to address financial, social, and environmental resiliency and document them. And you're also going to examine a list of 72 fundable resiliency projects to find out what you've already done and to get a feel for what the program can fund. And these are also listed on the back of that fact sheet I've been talking about. And I'll detail those fundable projects here in a moment. Next, you'll need to host a public meeting to share the self-assessment results and receive feedback from your community as to what some of those priority projects would be. Then you'll finally complete the Community Resilience Partnership application, which is online, and basically it's just uploading the documents that you've already created in those steps above. And then once you're finally enrolled, you can now apply for your first community action grant with the help of your service provider. Now, you also may enroll and apply for your first community action grant on your own, but we're going to hear from our service providers today about the towns that they are assisting and how everything's going on in their neck of the woods. So next slide. So once your community is enrolled, you do have access to regional coordinators, which can provide project development and technical expertise for future projects, including more community action grants, and particularly for large state and federal funding opportunities. And regional coordinators are also looking to foster collaborative projects among communities. So this is an addition to the assistance that goes beyond the first community action grant that you would write with your service providers and lasts throughout the duration that a community is enrolled in the partnership. And there are actually 4 regional coordinators in our state, illustrated by this map. And you can find their contacts also in the fact sheet and in a hyperlink in the chat. Okay, next, thank you. So a little bit more about those community action grants. The grants opened this year in March and September, and we will see a similar deadline in 2023. They can provide up to $50,000 to a community, and those applications can include more than one priority project. It could also go up to $125,000 for a multi-municipal award, but please note that all towns going in on such a project need to all be enrolled. So for instance, if a regional transfer station was looking to make some upgrades, all towns that that district supports must be enrolled in the partnership. Also, these projects that require no match funding are listed on what's called the list of 72 community actions provided by GoPIF. We do have a link to that we'll add in the chat. And an abbreviated version of this is on the back of that fact sheet I spoke about. Now you can also do projects that are not on this list, but you will require between 10 and 20% match, which would be dependent on the community size and tax assessment thresholds. You also have up to 2 years to use the funding, and the funds can also be used as match for cost share for federal grants. So next slide. So a little bit about what those grants cover. So transportation, such as purchasing or leasing electric vehicles, charging stations, biking, walking infrastructure, building modernization. So that's things like weatherization, lighting and heating upgrades, street light upgrades to LEDs, as well as emission reductions. So that would be things like doing energy audits, adopting renewable energy ordinances, installing renewable energy projects in your community, as well as natural resources and jobs. So that would be adopting policies to incentivize local food production and consumption. And that includes things like creating community gardens. Next slide. It also covers promoting natural climate solutions. So that's things like increasing green space, conserving land, conserving revegetated floodplains and river buffers, restoring floodplains, and shorelines. Building resilient communities is conducting community vulnerability assessment. It could be early warning plans. It could be improving your shelters, extreme temperature emergency planning, as well as climate-ready infrastructure. So that would be capital improvement plans, improvements to water and wastewater infrastructure, stormwater management, and then lastly, engaging the vulnerable community. And so that could include making sure that businesses, your community at-risk populations are aware of the resources and vulnerabilities regarding their community. And so one last slide here I wanted to paint a picture for you as to how the Community Resilience Partnership has been going throughout the year. It really kicked off in 2022, and the first community action grants being available in March. There was a lot of buzz about the program. So 29 towns had self-enrolled prior to that first community action grant going out, and 22 of those 29 communities did enroll and receive their first community action grant. An additional 48 communities have since joined. So that's a total of 77 communities now enrolled, covering 36% of Maine's population. So of those 77 communities, we're finding that about half of them are in southern Maine, 25% are along the coast, another 20% are here in the central and western Maine. So that's around the population of all of Oxford County, and then 10% in northern Maine. So this past September, most of the enrolled communities also applied for a second round of grants. An additional 50 grants were awarded, and 55 communities are going to benefit from those awards. And we're going to hear a little bit more about those communities and some of those grants with our service providers. And then in October, service providers were granted their grant to help an additional 36 tribes and municipalities that will be working on enrollment starting this winter. A fact sheet we have in the chat details those 50 community action grants that came out to give you an idea of what folks are funding, and also the 36 new communities that will be supported in their service providers. So this graph here just kind of illustrates the activity that's been happening in October and September. So the blue dots represent the communities that got grants in September, and then the green dots illustrate who's receiving assistance from service providers this coming round. And I just want to close in saying that under the Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan, we had a goal of reaching 100 communities engaging with the Community Resilience Partnership, and we are pleased to say that we've achieved that. Participants include the Aroostook Band of Micmacs, the Passamaquoddy Tribe at Pleasant Point, the Holton Band of Maliseet, and the Penobscot Nation, among over 100 other towns, for a total of 127 communities. So without further ado, I want to start switching it over to our service providers, and hopefully they will have a smooth, seamless transition into their slides. I apologize. Take it away, Robin.
Oh, I thought Zach was going next. Hello. So let's see, we need to share a screen. We'll share this one. And then we will go here like this. Can everyone see our screen pretty well? No. No. Oh, yeah. Okay. Let us know if you can see our screen.
We can see
great.
it.
All right, wonderful. Well, hi, my name is Robin. I'm the Community Resilience Coordinator here at Kennebec Valley Council of Governments, and I'm joined by my environmental planner here, Olivia Kunish, joined KVCOG at the beginning of September, I believe. And she is working on a lot of different projects with our municipalities, and is assisting me with the 8 municipalities that we applied on behalf of for this GoPIF enrollment process. So the approach that we took really builds on some of my skills. As Yvette mentioned, I do have a background working with social-based approaches. And so we felt that a cohort-based community resilience series really would benefit the different municipalities that we have. That is also based on different characteristics and the resources that they're able to really gain from each other. So we actually did a series over the summer with our initial communities, and I'd like to share a little bit with you about some of the lessons that were learned, and also some of the the forward thinking that is going to inform how we're working with the 3 additional towns that we gained in September. So, really diving into what climate action looks like at the local level really depends on, the individual communities being able to assess, as this process mentions, what community resilience is, and what does climate action look like in terms of the impacts on the community. And that can be really difficult for communities to really wrap their minds around, because as you see in that fact sheet, climate action grants can envelop many, many different types of things that you wouldn't necessarily think is a climate action activity. And so the Maine Won't Wait plan really depends on those 7 different strategies, based on even, public engagement and activity, active transportation. And some of these things are projects related to things that communities are already doing. So some of the benefits to this cohort approach increases communication between neighboring towns. Some of these towns are interested in working with each other, haven't really had a structured opportunity to be able to do that. And so KVCOG has always been looking for ways, as we continue to regionalize, to bring communities together under, common goals and having those conversations. Another benefit is that we can avoid duplication and redundancy where cost savings can be found. So we already offer things like bulk purchasing and ways to assist towns to come together and really save money on road salt and signs and things like that. So if you expand that idea to other types of regional planning, where folks can get grants for $50,000, as we mentioned, towns that have a multi-town grant can increase their threshold and really gain some real benefit in a larger project. This also fosters economic opportunity and prosperity in a region. As you look at some of these 72 projects, you really can see how the benefits are really widespread. Some of the challenges that I noticed were, we really need to pay attention to the culture and politics of every town. There are different priorities and characteristics of every town. And, there might be some history of working with each other that may or may not have worked out in the past. So really trying to dive into that and look at how we can use this opportunity to rewrite that history. And then there are also towns with varied capacity for this work, and KVCOG can step in as a facilitator for a lot of these things. And we've found that really useful for towns that are very interested and have created committees, to work with or provide a model for a neighboring town who really is sort of swimming in that work and not really knowing what to do because they don't have, those committees formed or that volunteer environment of the town. So some examples of the regional work that we're really excited about began with the Town of Freedom and Unity. And while this is not in Kennebec and Somerset, as Yvette mentioned, I think this is worth talking about because Freedom came to us and they were very, very excited. They were interested in working on a project. They had already sort of formed this in their mind that they wanted to work with neighboring towns of Unity and Knox because they were trying to address a piece of property that needed some remediation and looking at its potential for environmental conservation and active transportation. So things like walking and trails and preserving wetlands and things like that. And so they actually came to KV-COG because they were looking for an environmental assay. And so I said, well, we can do this, but we can do this as part of a larger program if you're interested in looking at how, you can design a project around the strategies of the Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan. And so after talking to Freedom, they actually have a committee of volunteers that work on projects like this. So this is a community that has that type of structure. And, they were really interested in enrolling, and they practically drove the process themselves with very little guidance from myself. They were able to do this relatively easily and had the capacity and knowledge base to really get that project done. There was a little bit of miscommunication about what those public engagement meetings could look like, because again, they had a project in mind and they were really focused on what they thought they wanted to do. That I had to pull back and say, this community engagement process is really about looking at a bigger picture. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So they wanted to invite Unity and Knox into this process. But again, like Yvette said, a multi-town project does need to occur between communities that are already enrolled when that grant is being written. And so we were able to pull in Unity and gain on behalf of the town support from the state to work with them. But what we did notice, again, as I mentioned, that Unity does not have similar characteristics in terms of that volunteer culture and capacity. So they have really struggled with the process, and Freedom has tried to sort of step in and model some of that work. But there is a lot of culture and characteristics that can make that really difficult. And so KV-COG as also their member-based COG, we've really tried to work with them and get them both in the same place in the enrollment process. Now, moving on to Reedfield, Fayette, and Wayne, we've actually found a different culture, and we found a little bit more grease, as maybe you could say, with Reedfield being incredibly interested in working with Fayette and Wayne on a project because they've worked on projects with these other two towns before and have had some success with them. So Reedfield has gone through probably about 75% of the enrollment process and is planning their community engagement session. They're actually doing this by themselves. They are not one of our towns that has applied on behalf of them for technical assistance, but they have been so interested that we just, they're going so fast that we're not really able to catch up with them in that way. But as member towns, these three towns are going to do a great job in enrolling together and trying to find a way to investigate what kinds of projects would really benefit the three towns. So we're hoping that these community engagement sessions will actually bring out a project as opposed to Freedom and Unity that have something sort of well-formed in mind. So this is an example of regional work that we're really looking forward to bringing towns together, again, to increase the capacity for the work, but then also to increase the amount of money that they're able to gain from the program. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about big projects. Again, some of our towns have already come to us with a big project in mind and are looking to, say, let's fund a piece of this project. And that can be difficult, to really kind of insert the community action grants into an already existing big idea. So in Skowhegan, for example, they have a downtown plan. They have a big project and a big idea in mind. So what I've tried to do is to coach them in looking at some of this as that larger vision, and that larger vision really taps into the Maine Won't Wait plan, because it is already using some of these strategies related to active transportation and environmental conservation and public engagement. So they're already doing a lot of these things. And so that really creates a larger vision that speaks back to the climate action plan. But then we also want to design and assess a project that is feasible and measurable. And if they're applying for a grant, say for $50,000, that it is a full project that can be completed, you know, not half built, that really depends on applying for a grant in a second round, right? So we're really working on how to go through this enrollment process and build on a grant that speaks to that larger vision of a project that's already in motion. So that's another benefit of doing this, is, you know, looking at that bigger picture and assessing all of a community's needs and how they relate back to climate action. Another example of, you know, looking at that big picture is what happened in Waterville. Waterville didn't have a lot of these ideas in place, but as many people may know, Waterville has a lot of things already going on, and already sort of this larger vision of what Waterville, the downtown, can look like, and those types of things. So recently we held their climate action, their community engagement meeting. There were probably about 35 to 40 people there. And all of a sudden we realized that a committee was actually forming right in front of our eyes. And what ended up happening as a result of that meeting is that about 75% of the people that had attended were willing to form a committee that would inform the town, the city, about what some of these priorities should be, and put a little bit of weight behind that. So it was really, really wonderful to see how it just organically came about. And in addition to that, the school communities had actually found a way to have discussions about how youth can be involved in some of these things. So looking at how some of these balls are already rolling, and then come back to the climate action plan and say, okay, how can we give some of our ideas a little bit more structure and motivation, and then move forward with that. So these are ways that a big project that's already formed can bring that down, but then also a big project can be formed from this enrollment process and this assessment process. So I would kind of encourage you to look at some of these things as opportunities to bring that down, but then also to scale up any type of motivation that your community has. I think that's everything that we wanted to say. So, you know, any questions after this session, please definitely pose those to us.
Thank you very much, Robin. I just want to quickly ask some folks to rename themselves if they could in the participants tab. Please note which town you're in. And now we will move on to Claire.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'll hop right into it. I'm Claire McGlinchey, the Climate Resiliency Program Manager at CB, and we've been working with communities as a service provider in Oxford County. So you can see here, sorry, I'm going to pause for a second to hide you guys. You're blocking my screen a little. You can see here the communities that we've been working with. We're based in Norway, where that little marker is, and all of those dots in green are the communities we've been working with. So in the spring of 2022, we informally worked with Norway as a service provider. Those were before the service provider funding was available, but Norway is our community and we wanted to see them get in on this opportunity. In the fall 2022, we worked with our first official cohort. Those were Bethel, Otisfield, Paris, and Woodstock. And we're currently working with Casco, Hartford, Lovell, Oxford, and Sumner. And something I want to point out about these communities is for the most part, they're quite small. They may lack a town manager, and we may have just been working with volunteers or the select board. And so we've had the opportunity to really dig in with kind of the community volunteers and just who shows up to these meetings to do this work. So I wanted to give you a sense of some of the resilience priorities that have emerged from this process, especially in the fall, those communities that have completed their enrollment. I'm not going to go through this line by line, but I did want to just put this all on the screen to show you just the breadth of what these towns came up with. And also as a resource, if you want to grab a screenshot, if you're a neighbor, if you want to know what some of these communities are prioritizing and are interested in collaborating in a future grant, go ahead and grab that information. But I figured this would be a little easier to digest. So I put together a little summary of the priorities from our communities in the fall, plus Norway. And you can see that the number one priority that has emerged from this enrollment process is to conduct an assessment that identifies climate risks and vulnerable populations. We have heard time and time again that communities are concerned about climate resilience out here, but they don't really know where to start, and they haven't really started assessing what's going on, who's vulnerable. And that theme continues through those other priorities, conducting a baseline for energy usage, conducting an infrastructure vulnerability assessment, creating or updating a watershed plan. These all speak to that planning piece, that assessment piece that really hasn't taken place out here at all. And especially since enrolling in this partnership for a lot of communities that we've worked with has been their first step to do anything regarding climate action, that assessment piece has been really important, as well as building capacity. So establishing a committee of stakeholders to work on resilience projects has been really important for a lot of communities, and in some cases, a necessity for them to maintain their momentum and continue their work through the partnership. So you may be wondering how we came up with all of those priorities. And in our case, the prioritization and the work to enroll really depends on community engagement. Like I mentioned, we've been working with smaller communities where there might not be that capacity within town officials and staff. And so turning to the community, to residents who want to plug into this has been really important. So I wanted to give you an idea of how we've approached this. One thing is that we like to make our community engagement interactive. One thing that allows us to do that is we like to hold 2 public workshops instead of just one. It gives us some time to spread out, to not feel that pressure of needing to get through everything in one session. And so across those 2 sessions, we try to keep things interactive and a little lighthearted, even though the material can sometimes be daunting, especially, again, since a lot of communities haven't started this work. So we also understand people have different ways of engaging and different ways of sharing their thoughts, and we want to be inclusive to all of these different ways of showing up in a meeting. So we have climate posters with facts that people can interact with. We do dot exercises, so we'll take notes during the meeting on priorities that emerge and allow people to stick dots on the ones that they really resonate with and want to see the town pursue. With the municipal resolution that needs to be passed, there are some optional statements that we like to have folks look through and see, what would they want put in that resolution when the select board signs it. And we also like to provide an opportunity for people to speak to their neighbors. So we're not just getting up there and presenting the whole time, or just having a dialogue or a Q&A between participants and CB, the facilitators. We like to have people connect with their neighbors. So we'll do partner discussions. If we have enough people, we'll break out into breakout groups. And that's really key to this, especially, again, since these conversations haven't necessarily come up in these towns before, and because CB isn't necessarily a part of all of these communities. It's important to kind of foster those relationships and opportunities for people to discuss this with their neighbors and with their fellow community members, because those are the folks who are going to keep this momentum and keep this work going after our service provider work is finished. We also like to be responsive to the needs of the group that we're working with. So I have two examples here, Otisfield on the left and Woodstock on the right. Otisfield, our first community engagement session that we did, we had over 35 people who showed up, and we were so impressed with the turnout. And there is a mix of people who had been doing this work for a while, not necessarily in town government, but who were very interested in climate resilience and conservation. And there are also people in the room who were a little more skeptical or hesitant to dive in on this, who weren't really sure why we needed community resilience, why Otisfield should be joining the partnership. And in that first session, while we were in the middle of kind of engaging around the priorities, we realized that there was some tension there, and we pivoted. Having that second meeting lined up really helped for that, because we could say, okay, we can adjust our schedule, move things around, and address the needs of the group here. It ended up being a really great opportunity to address some of the underlying concerns and questions that were there in the audience. It gave the opportunity for a member of the select board to step up and really make the case for why he thought the town should be pursuing this opportunity. And at the end of the day, like Waterville, Otisfield ended up forming a committee as a result of that engagement process, because they realized they needed to continue that community input through the process. On the other hand, we had we had Woodstock. And in Woodstock, we had a very different group. It was smaller. It was mostly composed of members of the select board, the town manager, and members of the conservation committee. And so it was a lot of people who had been involved in the town for a long time and working on these issues. And for the most part, people who had actually asked us to work with Woodstock as a service provider. And so in that case, we went a little less heavy on justifying why we needed to be thinking about climate change and the benefits of joining the partnership, and spent a little more time digging into the enrollment materials and gathering feedback on those. Does this assessment make sense? Are there things we're missing? What specific statements do we want in the resolution? And at the end of the day, what and why are the priorities for the community? And then finally, we like to keep things inclusive. One way we do that is by offering hybrid options for all of our meetings. You can see our little Zoom owl set up on the left. That's great for folks who aren't just sick, although last night we had someone with COVID who was able to Zoom in. But there's also people who aren't comfortable driving at night, people who might have kids at home that they don't want to leave to go to a public meeting at night. And all sorts of other reasons. And so it's a way to try and limit some of the, and remove some of the barriers to participation. We also offer stipends for people who have financial barriers to participation. Finally, we try and promote as widely as we can in the community, and vary that based on what resources are in the community. If there's a town Facebook page, we try and put it out there. If there's a sandwich board at the local shop that's willing to promote, we'll put it there. Here we have a case in Otisfield. They put up just community resilience info session on a sign outside the community hall. And say half the people who showed up that day showed up because of that sign. And so it also got some of those folks who otherwise may not have come if they had just seen a flyer about climate resilience. They may have been a little hesitant, but they saw that there was a meeting happening at their community hall, and for them that was enough of a reason to show up. And it was a great way to get some other voices in the room who weren't just the usual suspects or the choir, and it fostered some really deep discussion. So now that we went through the engagement process and did all the work to complete the assessments, all the enrollment, and completed the grants with communities, the next step for all these towns is to implement their projects. All of our communities were funded, and you can see the different projects that they're funded for there. We will have a future webinar on the community action grants and the process for applying for those. So I won't go too deep here, but definitely keep an eye out for that next session. And it's been wonderful to see this money coming into these towns who are small, they have smaller budgets, and this really isn't an insignificant amount of funding for them. This is going to make a change for their community, and everyone's been really excited to receive these grants. So I wanted to finish with a few takeaways for folks who are considering going through this process on their own, or people who are considering working with service providers. I encourage you to start enrollment early or whenever you want. The beauty of the partnership is that you can enroll at any time, regardless of when you're planning to apply for a community action grant. But whenever you decide, we want to apply in March, or we want to apply for that grant in September, leave yourself plenty of room. It really makes a difference for when you're digging in on that community engagement, completing those assessments, and most importantly, translating all of that feedback you get into that final grant, narrowing down what is the first project that we want to pursue funding for. So give yourself time for that. I also encourage you to value the input you receive. So kind of what Robin was getting at, it's great to have a project in mind. It is great to have a project in mind, but you also want to listen to the community, listen to the folks who are showing up, and as much as possible, let them guide the priorities. In all of our towns, we were very pleased that the select board and the town managers ended up, engaging, listening, and the priorities that they submitted for their enrollment were what came out of the community engagement sessions. So that was fantastic. We also think it's great to embrace the climate conversations that emerge along the way. It's not just about getting those enrollment materials done. Again, in these towns that may not have really started to talk about climate change and moving on climate action, it can raise a lot of different feelings. Some people might be really concerned about this and may not have had a space to talk about it. Other people might not really know what's going on with climate change or might be a little skeptical of it. And wherever people fall on the spectrum, it's really valuable to just bring people together and have those conversations and see where it can lead. Maybe it forms, maybe it leads to a committee, maybe it leads to a climate action plan. Who knows? There's so much potential in just having those conversations with people. And then finally, I encourage you to maximize your capacity and use the resources available through this partnership. Obviously, if you are, apologies. Obviously, if you are attending this webinar today, you know that there are these resources available and you're starting to take advantage to it. Sorry guys, I'm in the middle of a presentation. Sorry, Scott, apologies everyone. I think there's some background noise. I'm almost done. Sorry everyone. So obviously you're starting to utilize those resources that are available to a certain extent, but definitely plug in. If you're considering working with a service provider, I highly encourage it. If you're enrolled in the partnership, definitely connect with your regional coordinator. And I encourage you to look inward. there might be that group of citizens in the town who are willing to form a resilience committee to keep this work going. So if you're feeling like you're stretched thin, if you don't know if you have the capacity to do this work, there's definitely ways to maximize that capacity. And that's it for me. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
Thank you, Claire. That was great. I appreciate you plugging the program, the series that we've got going on. We're going to have more sessions, involving Efficiency Maine programs, DOT, solar. So do stay tuned, and we'll make sure that those resources come out. And so last we have Zach.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out and joining us today. I hope you can see my screen all right. My name is Zach Gosselin. I am the Environmental and Resiliency Coordinator here at AVCOG. So my role is as a service provider, like we mentioned before, is to help towns enroll, as well as working towards their first community action grant. So in the AVCOG territory, we're currently working with 9 towns. The green towns, which are highlighted by the green X, are towns that are working to enroll as of right now. So we have Eustis, Kingfield, Phillips, Rangeley, and Wilton, which we were awarded the service provider grant back in October to work with. We currently have 1 town enrolled and working on their first community action grant in March, which is Chesterville. And we have 3 towns who have been CAG funded, Carthage, Greenwood, and Jay. Now we've heard some great presentations so far. So what my presentation is going to focus on 2 communities who took different approaches to the process, and kind of highlight how they came about their priority projects, as well as the process to getting there. The first town I'd like to talk about is Carthage. Carthage is a small town, about 540 people, very limited municipal assistance. They have 3 select board members and 2 municipal employees that help them keep the town running. So it's very, very small. Most of them still work with pagers. Broadband internet access is very low in Carthage. While working with Carthage, we identified several vulnerabilities. One being internet access. So communicating with a small town, a very rural town, can pose its challenges. So making sure we're in constant contact on the phone more than email. That way we can guarantee they're getting their materials. When looking at Carthage, there was a few vulnerabilities that came up while assessing them. Prolonged power outage, wildfires, flooding, and their emergency communications. Now, as you can see, the Community Resilience Workshop sign right there, that is the main billboard in Carthage. So anything going on in the town really goes through that one billboard. So that shows you, as a small town, getting the word out can be challenging as well. They did have some strengths. So as part of the self-assessment, service provider will go through and assess the vulnerabilities and strengths if they need to, as well as assisting in any other of the documents. Some of the strengths that Carthage has with their emergency operations plan, they have mutual aid support from other municipalities who have more resources, as well as they have a strong volunteer fire department and their road investments. So the public engagement process can look like many different things, like Claire mentioned. In our small town of Carthage here, our public engagement was fairly small. When we did end up going to the public engagement, there was a committee that started to form. So the committee was very interested in building resilience for the town of Carthage. This public engagement session wasn't as interactive as Claire's. Being a smaller community, we had probably 8 or so participants that were really interested in hearing about the program, and it engaged in more of a one-on-one discussion. Everyone had their chance to talk. Everyone was very interested and gave their feedback. So when we were having those one-on-one conversations, some priority projects came about. Carthage was very interested in efficiency, heating and cooling, weatherization upgrades, their food pantry, which serves their vulnerable senior population, as well as their low-income residents, is in need of some help. So, you know, identifying vulnerable populations like that can help assist them in that way. They're also interested in some communications and shelter improvements. So the town hall also serves as their shelter, which in case classifies for their upgrades. So the way that Carthage was able to build financial and environmental resilience through this process is they identified that they needed 4 heat pumps, as well as a ceiling insulation on the top of the town hall, which would increase their building envelope as a whole. Increasing the building envelope is important, as you know, if you're implementing energy efficiency projects, you want to make sure that everything is insulated properly and all that. Energy efficient appliances like microwave and air purification units, those were both things that were low cost, but definitely immediate needs for the town hall. Other priority projects continued. So for their food pantry, like we were saying, it also serves their food pantry and their emergency shelter. So to make sure they have cold water, that their milk stays cold for their seniors, they identified energy efficient refrigerators as well as freezers, which will immediately make a difference. As you can see the picture right here, this is their refrigerator, which needs constant unplugging and plugging back in order to get it to work. As well as in the community engagement session, Carthage said that they would like a energy fair, as well as building window inserts for their low income residents. Now, the reason that this is cool is because we're really focusing on engaging the community here, as well as the vulnerable population that is Carthage. So the energy fair really brings the community out and helps them understand energy efficiency. They can hear from vendors, as well as building window inserts for 30 low-income households. So those window inserts really go into insulating the house for the winter, reducing heating costs, and building efficiency as a whole. So just some Carthage key points here to finish. So their minimal employee capacity really had us working closely with the town of Carthage. So as a service provider, there are two ways you can go. You know, really engaged, or if a town has high municipal capacity, they are able to assist more, you know, in the self-assessments and things like that. Carthage also has minimal resources, which again had us as a service provider take a deeper dive into their plans, talking with their local officials to hear more about, you know, previous projects, as well as any other environmental projects that Carthage has done in the past. Again, like I said, frequent contact with the town was very important due to the low broadband, and the fact that this was the first time that Carthage had really talked about resilience. So they really wanted to make sure that they understood what they were working towards, as well as how to implement these projects. Speaking of the projects, so they had multiple projects. So that is the great thing about this, is you can, when applying for a grant, you can hit multiple projects in one grant, or you can have one big project like Robin mentioned. Again, we really want our communities to steer which way their priority projects go. So this was just one approach that Carthage took. And that will lead us into J, which took a different approach. The town of J has a population of around 4,000 people. It's a big mill town in the past decade. So when we were looking at J's self-assessment, you know, similar vulnerabilities to Carthage, as Franklin County does experience some of the same issues as we get more rural. Flooding, property damage from intense storms, as well as roads, bridges, and culverts being washed out. Some of their strengths, like Carthage, they're strong with their roads. They have a road committee. They have an emergency management ordinance and participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. While looking at Jay had already enacted some energy actions while we were looking at it. So they had already started thinking about resilience. So before the community action, or the community resilience partnership, came about, Jay had already worked on a solar purchase agreement, which saves them $10,000 per year. They also did an efficiency main lighting upgrade to all their streetlights, as well as doing an MMA risk reduction emergency lighting upgrade And those streetlights saved them $30,000 per year. So this town had already been thinking about resilience, so it made our job a little bit easier. Again, their public engagement, being a bigger town, they had more places to advertise and try to get more people. Yet there was only about a dozen community members that showed up, some of which were very excited about the projects and the program, others not. So we had a split room, which was very different from Carthage. Some of the priority projects we identified in J were energy audits, insulation and heating upgrades. Again, much like Carthage and our other Franklin County towns, energy efficient upgrades seem to be very important. Energy education for its residents, as well as EV and EV chargers, and updating their emergency operation. So again, I'm going to bring up the building envelope. So Jay had a project in mind, and it was a big project. In discussions with Jay, we explored many different routes. But in terms of the Community Resilience Partnership, they had identified that they had a poor building envelope in the town office, which also serves as a police station. And it was previously a restaurant, so there's a lot of ductwork, holes, things like that, that don't make it a great town office right now. The poor insulation causes a lot of energy loss. So before Jay, being proactive, they want to make sure that they can get this insulation down so that any other future energy efficiency projects aren't null and void. So this insulation project that they're working towards will set the baseline for future energy efficiency upgrades. Just to hit some key points on Jay, like I said, they are a larger town, so they have more municipal resources. We were able to talk to multiple town departments to get feedback on their self-assessment and hear about their previous projects. They did have a project in mind, which again is not a terrible thing, but like I said, we do want our towns to steer which way they go. In the public engagement, lower municipal costs, energy efficiency were identified. So this can benefit everyone. And their project implementation is a single project versus Carthage multiple project implementation. Both of these projects were funded, but it just does go to show you how different processes can be and how different projects can end up. That is my present.
All right, thank you, Zach. Now we want to open it up to questions. And we did have one in the chat. And it is, can community action grants fund only third-party services and materials, or can they be used to fund internal capacity as well as eligible community actions? We do have the list of the 72 actions. And they range from things that are, the heat pumps and the actual physical items, but they can also be working towards writing a plan or assessment plan, writing ordinances. So certainly you can, look for money to assist with that. We just saw that, I think it was Yarmouth and Freeport, I think put in for sharing a resiliency coordinator position. So I'm not sure if this was from Jonathan Labonte. If you, feel free to unmute yourself. I'm not sure if I've answered your question. Let's see. And if folks want to raise their hand, we can pick on you that way. I don't see any questions or hands raised here. I guess I have a few questions to kick it off. So let's see, KV-COG, you've worked with some larger towns with capacity, including town managers and planners. So can you tell us a little bit more about the approach you take when you actually are able to, utilize staff? What's the difference between the town steering the ship and maybe communities that, are looking to you for more support. Robin?
Off mute. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if I was off mute. Yeah, so some of those larger towns have been able to approach this process, with, capacity. There's someone that they have designated a point of contact to, for example, complete the resilience assessment. This is something that is a good task for a town manager or another staff, for example, to be able to complete this assessment rather quickly. It's a checklist. There's no right or wrong answers, but really it's about, looking at what the town has already done, what is already in place in your comp plan, going to your fire marshal and asking them if there is a like an emergency management plan within the city government. And so a lot of that has been, a couple of planning meetings to just guide that community to complete that assessment. And then also to, to plan a community engagement meeting. And with a larger town or a larger city, for example, I'll bring in Waterville again. They are well versed in community engagement meetings, holding one on housing, or holding larger council meetings that are open to the public. So they have space for this. They have fault lines for communication and advertising these meetings. So that has been relatively easy. One thing that I would say is that it could be possible that there are differing priorities. It really depends on, you do have a larger municipal governing structure. So you have, a town council, and then you have a council, and you have a city manager, and then you have an assistant city manager, and so on. And so it can be difficult if there are opposing views about climate and about some of these priorities and the benefit of going through this process. But for us, we really haven't encountered that. So that's definitely been a positive. But then also with larger towns, it is difficult, I think, to get them to participate in our cohort model. So that has been a little difficult in that fashion. So.
All right, great, thank you. Let's see. I guess I'll ask CB, in your community engagement processes, what has been something that's really surprised you?
Great question.
What should towns be planning for?
Yeah, I think I started to allude to it, kind of that tension that can exist. I think while that did happen in one town, I think what's more surprising is we were prepared for a little bit more blowback, especially since it's a newer topic in some communities. There's one community we're working with where we weren't sure if we would get to a community engagement session, that there had been some not as great relationships between them and CB in the past. And we were so thrilled with the conversation we had there, the creativity of the people who showed up, just the really nuanced ideas about how to make their community more resilient. And we've been finding that in a lot of our communities. So I think being prepared for some, I'll say blowback maybe, but being prepared to talk through and make the justification for why this matters is important, but also, like I said, see where the session leads you, see where folks are, and you may be surprised by the positive reception.
Nice. So Zach, question for you. You worked with a lot of small communities with no town manager or planners. So what could towns expect from utilizing somebody like AvCog for a service provider?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of AvCog territory is considered, smaller rural areas. Um, so the first thing we did to really help out with our smaller areas was give them the opportunity to have us do the self-evaluation, if they needed to. So really help them through the paperwork and getting them enrolled. Um, Carthage, for example, and was one select chair to work with. So their community engagement session and their materials were broadcasted towards a more, an older audience, as well as a lesser, how do I say this? A lesser marketing. So, a higher percent of their population will go to the town hall on a daily basis. So they had handouts, it was more direct recruiting rather than just putting a sign up or, broadcasting it on a Facebook page, which Carthage does not have. So there wasn't any social media advertising for smaller towns, at least Carthage. On the contrary, there are very tight-knit Facebook groups for some of these rural towns. So, I expect to see a lot more community engagement from a smaller town when it's advertised in their Facebook group or it's advertised, in a smaller knit community.
Let's see. I wanted to ask, I see a lot of towns represented in who's joining us, and also some folks from our county government. So I was wondering if anybody out there was, interested in maybe becoming a service provider. I see some towns that are already working with a service provider this round. Didn't know if the conversations today had sparked some interest or further questions about the process, if anybody wanted to engage me on this. All right. Well, I really, again, have enjoyed the conversation. I'm happy to take questions offline as well. We will follow up with an email, including all the resources that we had in the chat, the slide decks from today, and the recording. And so please do look forward to some upcoming sessions we have. I will mention that we do have one coming up on December 29th, which is a Thursday, from 12 to 1:30. And this is going to be climate change from understanding to action. Learn about climate mitigation and how towns are using the program to reduce greenhouse gases through solar and electrification, and also to achieve cost savings. So I'll put a link into the upcoming sessions as well. So look for that email this week. And was there anything else?